What up, YouTube Digital? I want to go over a basic rule in electronics. The rule is volts times amps equals watts. Now, with that, if you need to figure out one of the equations, if you need to figure out wattage or voltage or whatever, you just need two of the numbers to figure out the third. So if you need to know wattage, of course, you take volts times the amps equals watts. If you need to figure out the amperage, you take wattage divided by voltage equals amperage. If you need to figure out, amperage, voltage, you take wattage divided by amperage equals wattage. Voltage. It's a pillar. It's a stable. It's probably the most important rule you need to learn about electricity and electronics is voltage times amperage equals wattage. Pillar, and just about even being an electrician, that's like pillar. So you need to know that for many reasons. What size wire you need, figure out the amperage of your thing, what fuses you need, all that shit. Like, we know, I know, this is a 400 watt amp at 2 ohms. At 4 ohms, it only does 200 watts. I take this dial here, turn it to the 200 range, because that's the smallest on this. And I put this here and this here, and I'll get -4. If I turned off the power, that'd be just 4. It wouldn't be negative. So this has a 4 ohm load on this amp, and I know that at 4 ohms, this thing will do 200 watts. So now we have voltage and wattage, and we need to figure out amperage, which usually, now technically, since we know that my power supply is a kick-ass unit and is rock solid, 13.83. So we would go up to our calculator, we take 200 divided by 13.83, and we get roughly about 14.5 amps. Okay, I like to divide by 10 instead of 13.83. Reason being is it gives you more of a headroom. It gives you a little overhead, just in case. Because if I got a 25 amp power supply, or a 15 amp power supply, and if I don't know, if it pulled a little bit too much, it'd probably trip it, make it, it's kind of like a breaker in your house. You plug one too many things in. So I like to divide by 10, which would give me a 20 amp circuit instead of a 15. It gives you just a little bit headway, and it's easier to figure out in your head on the go too. So I know this pulls 20 amps, so that means that technically I could probably have gotten away with running an 8 gauge wire from the battery to this. Technically I wouldn't have done, I would still done 4 gauge, but yeah. So that's why that rule is there, so you can figure out. Now I know I can run 8 gauge if I absolutely had to, but 4 gauge would be a lot better. The other thing is let's talk about power for a second. It also allows you to know what fuse size you need. I mean, this right here we'll look up here. Don't concern yourself with this side. I couldn't find a distro block, so I'm using a fuse thing. As soon as I find my distro block, that's gone. Okay. That's what, an 80 and a 60. Way overdone. Way overdone. I need to go find the right fuses for this, which would be like a 20. And I think this one would be about the same as a 20. So I need to go find the right fuses, because over fusing or going up too high is a big no-no. It's a way you fry electronics. Luckily, the fuses that are right here are the right size. Now, other thing. Oh, here, let's look right here. This is a 4-gauge gold ring. And I think I've showed this before. Here, we'll make this is a positive now, because I can put a positive cover on it. You can make this a black or whatever. Now, when you are running power wires from the front to the back, you only run the positive. And of course, you want to run the biggest that you can afford, but especially you want to figure out the amperage, because if I was pulling, say, 30 amps, you would have to run 4-gauge. So you need to figure all that out beforehand. Now, when you do the ground, you need to sand down your body so it's bare metal, an area about this big. Okay, then you need to drill a hole and make sure you know what the hell's on the other side, because you need to put a bolt this size through this and through the hole, which this would be, I think, about a 3/8. Yeah, about a 3/8 hole through. And then you need to firmly bolt this to the ground. You want the ground as short as possible. You don't have to get micromanage it, but you do want to get it as short as possible. The power wire, the positive, the same thing. But the other reason why you want to know this volts times amps equals watts and all that other stuff is you can figure out your battery. If you need to go up a size on your battery, you also can figure out whether your alternator will handle an extra 20 amps load all the time. So it's something to look into. Oh, other thing on these is very good to actually crimp and solder these. It's a little hard. These ones are a little harder to solder than the other ones that have. You can buy a copper version, not a gold, but a copper version in the battery department at your auto parts store. And this there's no hole all the way through. You can see my finger. This part right here is enclosed in, so you can heat it on a vise. Heat this all up and just keep pouring solder down there. Thick. What size is this? 0.05 solder. And you can just keep feeding it down in that hole as you're blowtorching it. And it'll fill up with solder, and then you could put your wire in there with the solder still hot, and it'll solder it nicely. You don't have to crimp and all that other stuff. But here's the basic rule of electronics to me, and I think a lot of people in electronics would agree. Voltage times amperage equals wattage, and the other way around. So it's a factor in everything, even in 110 or 220 or 440. It's a factor. So definitely remember that. And again, in car audio and stuff, I like to divide by, if I'm using voltage, I like to use 10 instead of 12 or 13. The other reason is your alternators are all different, so 10 is a nicer number. One alternator might put out 15 all the way solid, like a GM or a Ford, but some of the imports only put out 14 when they're on. So you're not getting as much. So I like to figure it by 10. That's just me. Alright, peace.